My daughter Claire died on a Thursday. That's what they told me anyway. A small plane crash, they said, up in the rugged mountains of Vermont. The kind of accident that leaves nothing but ash and questions. I stood there at her funeral, a cold wind cutting through my old wool coat, watching the polished oak coffin gleam under the gray sky. My son-in-law Michael stood beside it, his face a mask of grief. He insisted on a closed casket. The crash was too devastating, he said, his voice soft, almost too soft. We should remember Claire as she was. Vibrant, beautiful, but something wasn't right. I've spent 45 years fixing clocks, my hands steady on the tiniest gears, my ears tuned to the faintest tick out of place. I know when a mechanism is off, when the rhythm's wrong, when a machine is hiding a flaw. Standing there, staring at that sealed box, I felt it, a hitch in the works, a gear slipping. Michael's words were too polished, his sorrow too rehearsed. My name is Henry Sullivan. I'm 70 years old, a retired watchmaker from Burlington, Vermont. For decades, I ran a little shop on Church Street, coaxing life back into pocket watches and grandfather clocks. I've learned to trust my instincts, the way a craftsman trusts his tools. A clock doesn't lie, but people do. And at Claire's funeral, the air was thick with something unspoken, something misaligned. As they lowered the coffin into the cold, rocky earth, my old flip phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled for it, my calloused fingers clumsy in the chill. The screen glowed with a message from a number I didn't know. 6 words that stopped my heart. "Dad, I'm alive!" "Don't trust Michael," I didn't gasp. I didn't drop the phone, but the world tilted, like a clock knocked off its balance. My eyes darted to Michael, standing there with his head bowed, his hands clasped just a little too tightly. The mourners around us murmured prayers, but all I could hear was the tick-tick-tick of a truth I hadn't yet uncovered. If you're listening to my story, please drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe a father's gut is never wrong, hit that like button and subscribe. I've spent my life fixing broken things, clocks mostly, but sometimes hearts. And standing there at my daughter's grave, I knew something was broken in this story. Michael's grief was a performance, a clock wound too tight, ready to snap. The closed casket. That was the first gear out of place. Claire was never one to hide. She faced the world head-on, with a fire in her eyes that reminded me of her mother. The idea that she'd want to be locked away, even in death, felt like a lie. I looked at the coffin one last time, the polished wood gleaming like a secret. My fingers tightened around the phone in my pocket. Whoever sent that message, whether it was Claire or a cruel trick, I was going to find out. Because when a clock stops ticking, you don't just bury it. You open it up, find the broken piece, and set it right. That text message sat in my chest like a weight, heavy and cold, as I stood there in the cemetery. The mourners drifted away, their black umbrellas bobbing like shadows under the gray Vermont sky. Michael lingered by the grave, his face still a perfect picture of sorrow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a counterfeit, a cheap watch with a shiny case but no heart inside. I've spent my life listening to the tick of a clock, knowing when it's true and when it's off. Michael's grief, it was off, like a gear skipping in the dark. 2 months ago, Claire had called me late at night. Her voice was tight, the way it got when she was trying to hold something together. She was always like that, strong even when she was scared. "Dad," she'd said, "Michael's pushing to sell my company. He's been meeting with some big pharmaceutical people behind my back. He talks about the money like it's already his." Claire ran a biotech startup, building these tiny sensors that could detect diseases before you even felt sick. It was her life's work, her way of leaving a mark. She wasn't one to let it go lightly. I'd told her it was probably just business stress, the kind of thing couples work through. "Talk to him, sweetheart," I'd said. "You're smarter than anyone I know. He'll figure it out." Now, standing at her funeral, those words tasted bitter, like oil on my tongue. I hadn't seen it then, but Claire had heard something in Michael's plans. A wrong note, a misaligned gear. Back at the funeral home, Michael played his part to perfection. He gripped my hand, his eyes glistening with tears that came right on cue. "Henry," he said, his voice low and practiced, "Claire loved you so much. We'll get through this together." His words were smooth, but I saw the mechanics behind them. The way his gaze flicked away too quickly, the way his hand tightened just a fraction too long. It was a performance, like a clock wound to impress, but not to last. I looked at him, my face heavy with the grief everyone expected. But inside my mind was turning, ticking like the old clocks I used to fix. Claire wasn't the kind to die quietly. She was a fighter, always had been. When she was a girl, she'd sit in my shop, watching me take apart pocket watches, asking why each piece mattered. She'd learned to see the world like I did. Every detail, every connection, every tiny thing that could throw the whole system off. The closed casket didn't fit. The story of the crash didn't fit. Michael didn't fit. As I left the cemetery, my phone buzzed again. Another message from that unknown number. I stepped away from the crowd, my heart pounding like a hammer on an anvil. The screen lit up, and there it was. "Dad, I'm being watched." "Don't believe the crash report," I froze. The words burned into me sharp and clear. Claire, my Claire, was out there somewhere, hiding, fighting. Or someone was playing a cruel game with a grieving old man. Either way, I wasn't going to stand there and let the gears keep turning the wrong way. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my fingers brushing the worn leather of my wallet, where I kept a photo of Claire at 16, grinning in my workshop with a screwdriver in her hand. Michael was still talking to the minister, his voice carrying that same polished grief. I watched him, and for the first time I saw the cracks. His smile was too quick to fade. His eyes didn't linger on the coffin long enough. He was a man who thought he'd won, but he didn't know I was already taking his machine apart in my head, piece by piece. I wasn't just a father mourning his daughter. I was a watchmaker, and I was going to find the flaw in his story. The weight of that second text message stayed with me, like a clock ticking too fast in a quiet room. I drove my old pickup truck through the winding roads of Burlington, the Vermont hills dark and silent under the evening sky. My hands gripped the wheel, steady as they'd been for decades, taking apart tiny gears and springs. But my mind was racing. Claire was out there, alive, hiding, or so the messages claimed. And Michael, my son-in-law, was at the center of something wrong, something broken. I wasn't going to let it lie. A watchmaker doesn't walk away from a broken clock. You find the flaw and you fix it. I needed help. Someone who could see through the fog of lies as clearly as I could hear a misfiring gear. That's why I went to Evelyn Harper. She was 67, a private investigator with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. We'd known each other for years, ever since she helped me track down a stolen shipment of antique clocks back in '98. Her office was a cramped room above a diner on Main Street, the kind of place that smelled of coffee and old paper. When I walked in, Evelyn was at her desk, a stack of files in front of her, her glasses perched on her nose. She looked up, saw my face, and didn't say a word about condolences. She just nodded, like she already knew I wasn't here to grieve. "Evelyn," I said, my voice low but steady, "I need you to help me take something apart." I slid my flip phone across her desk, the screen still glowing with Claire's messages. She read them slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Henry," she said finally, "this is a hell of a clock you're asking me to fix. We built a plan, piece by piece, like assembling a timepiece from scratch. I'd play the part of the grieving father, broken and lost, to get close to Michael. People let their guard down around an old man with a trembling voice. Evelyn would work the outside, digging into the crash report, Michael's finances, anything that didn't tick right. We'd use burner phones, paid in cash, and meet in quiet places, a park bench, a library, the diner downstairs. No digital trails. No mistakes. Michael was clever, and if Claire was really alive, whoever was watching her was dangerous. The next day, I called Michael. I let my voice crack, just enough to sell the act. Michael, I said, I was hoping I could come by the house. Be near Claire's things, you know. It'd help. He didn't hesitate. Of course, Henry, he said, his tone dripping with sympathy that didn't reach his eyes when I saw him later. The house feels empty without her. Come whenever you want. Their house was a sleek, modern place on the edge of town, all glass and sharp angles, paid for by Claire's biotech company. The first thing I noticed was the new security system, cameras blinking under the eaves, a gleaming keypad by the door. It wasn't the kind of setup you put in after a tragic accident. It was a fortress, built to keep something in or something out. My gut twisted. A man grieving his wife doesn't lock down his house like a bank vault, unless he's hiding more than sorrow. Michael let me in, his face a perfect mask of concern. He hovered as I moved through the living room, touching Claire's books, her favorite scarf draped over a chair. I played my part, shoulders slumped, eyes distant, but I was watching. His phone buzzed constantly, and every time he'd step into another room, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He wasn't a widower settling into grief. He was a man managing a crisis. I needed a reason to look around without raising suspicion. In the kitchen, I spotted a loose cabinet door, the kind Claire would have hated. "This hinge is off," I said, my voice soft, like an old man looking for something to do. Claire always liked things just right. Mind if I tighten it up? It'd feel good to fix something of hers. Michael waved a hand, dismissive. "Sure, Henry, whatever helps." He thought I was harmless, a tired old man clinging to memories. That was his first mistake. He led me to Claire's workshop in the garage, a small space where she tinkered with antique clocks in her spare time, just like I taught her. Her workbench was there, a sturdy oak table we'd built together when she was a teenager. Her tools, tiny screwdrivers, pliers, magnifying glasses, were her pride and joy, always arranged like soldiers in a row. But not today. The drawers were ajar, tools scattered, a pair of tweezers shoved in with the hammers. It was chaos, the kind of mess Claire would have never allowed. Someone had torn through this place, looking for something in a hurry. Someone who didn't know how her system worked. My heart thudded, not with fear, but with a spark of hope. Claire was meticulous like me. If she'd hidden something, it was still here. They hadn't found it. I ran my hand along the workbench, feeling the familiar grain of the wood. This wasn't just a clue. It was a message from my daughter, ticking softly, waiting for me to hear it. Meanwhile, Evelyn called me on the burner phone. "Henry," she said, her voice low, "the crash report's a mess. Signed by some rookie investigator, no witnesses, and the plane's serial number doesn't add up. It's like they built the story in a rush and didn't check the gears." I nodded, staring at the scattered tools. The machine was breaking down, and I was going to take it apart, one piece at a time. The garage was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Claire's workbench stood there, its scattered tools like a wound that hadn't healed. I ran my fingers along the oak, feeling every nick and scar from years of work we'd done together. This wasn't just a table. It was a piece of us, Claire and me, father and daughter, building something that ticked true. The mess in her workshop told me someone had been desperate, searching for something they didn't understand. But Claire was always one step ahead. If she'd hidden something, I'd find it. A watchmaker knows every piece matters, no matter how small. I knelt down, my knees creaking, and checked the underside of the workbench. My fingers traced the familiar grain until they found it, a seam, so subtle you'd miss it unless you knew it was there. Claire and I had built that secret compartment when she was 15, a place to hide spare gears and tiny screws. My heart thudded as I pressed the hidden latch. A soft click, and a small panel swung open. Inside, tucked in a bed of worn velvet, was a sleek black device, no bigger than a key fob, with a faint green light blinking. Next to it, a folded piece of paper. I opened it, and Claire's handwriting stared back at me. "Project Beacon, Dad. You know what to do." I sat back, the note trembling in my hand. Claire's words were like a gear slotting into place, steadying the chaos in my chest. She was alive. She had to be. This wasn't a trick. It was her, reaching out across the distance, trusting me to finish what she'd started. I slipped the device and note into my pocket and drove straight to Evelyn's office. The Vermont night pressing in around me like a held breath. Evelyn was waiting, her desk lamp casting shadows across her cluttered files. I handed her the device, and she turned it over in her hands, her eyes narrowing. "This is no USB stick, Henry," she said. "It's encrypted high-end stuff." Claire was playing a dangerous game. We hooked it up to her laptop, and after some tense minutes of her muttering about passcodes and firewalls, the screen flickered. A video loaded. Claire's face appeared, tired but fierce. Her dark hair pulled back, her eyes burning with that fire I'd always known. "Dad," she said. Her voice steady despite the strain. "If you're watching this, I'm either missing or they think I'm dead. Michael's working with someone, a man named Richard Holt from a big pharma company. They want my sensor technology, the one that can detect diseases before symptoms show. It's worth billions, and they're willing to kill for it." I leaned closer, my breath catching. Claire's voice filled the room, calm but unyielding, like she was explaining a complex clock mechanism. She laid it all out. Michael's secret meetings, recorded phone calls where he and Holt planned to stage her death in a plane crash, how they'd sell her life's work to a foreign buyer. She'd found out just in time, barely a week before they were set to act. "I didn't have time to go to the police," she said. "Their connections run too deep. So I did what you taught me, Dad. I took the machine apart and built a new one. I faked the crash. I'm in hiding, but I'm alive. This device, Project Beacon, is my insurance policy. It has everything. Emails, recordings, proof. Keep it safe. You'll know when to use it." The video ended and the silence was deafening. Evelyn leaned back, her face grim. "She's a damn genius, Henry. She didn't just survive, she built a trap." I nodded, my throat tight. The device in my hand felt heavier than any clock I'd ever held. It wasn't just proof. It was Claire's voice, her fight, her trust in me. I saw her at 10, sitting cross-legged in my shop, giggling as she tried to wind a spring too tight. I saw her at 20, presenting her first biotech prototype, her face glowing with pride. This device was her, still ticking, still fighting. Evelyn broke the silence. "The crash report's worse than I thought," she said. The investigator was a kid, barely out of training, and the plane's serial number. "It's a fake welded onto the wreckage. Sloppy work, Henry, but deliberate. And there's more. Michael's bank records show a $75,000 transfer to an offshore account the day before the crash. It's tied to a shell company, one that screams dirty money." I stared at the blank screen, Claire's words echoing in my head. She'd taken the machine apart, just like I'd taught her. Michael thought he'd won, thought he'd buried her. But he didn't know Claire. He didn't know us. The gears were turning now, and I was going to make sure his clock stopped for good. The plan was set, like a clock wound tight and ready to strike. I'd spent my life fixing broken timepieces, knowing exactly when to turn the final screw. Now it was time to turn the screw on Michael. Claire's device, Project Beacon, sat heavy in my pocket, a tiny gear ready to bring down a whole machine. Evelyn and I had gone over every detail, every tick of the plan. We knew Michael and his partner, Richard Holt, were greedy enough to walk right into the trap. All I had to do was set the bait. I called the estate lawyer, a man named Carter, who smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. I let my voice waver, the tired tremble of an old man lost in grief. "Mr. Carter," I said, "I'm struggling with all this. Company business. Michael says we need a formal meeting to transfer Claire's assets. I just want to honor her wishes. Can we do it soon? At her company's headquarters? Carter jumped at the chance, his voice smooth as polished brass. An excellent idea, Mr. Sullivan. We'll make it quick and respectful. Friday morning, 10 o'clock. Next I called Michael. I kept my tone soft, broken. Michael, I've set up the meeting. I think it's what Claire would have wanted, to settle things properly. He didn't miss a beat. Henry, you're right, he said, his voice thick with false warmth. It's the best way to move forward. For Claire. I could hear the greed behind his words, like a clock ticking too fast, ready to break. He thought he was steps away from stealing Claire's company, her life's work. He had no idea he was walking into a trap she'd built herself. Friday morning was cold, the kind of Vermont chill that seeps into your bones. Evelyn picked me up in her beat-up sedan, and we drove to the sleek glass tower of Claire's biotech company. The boardroom was on the top floor, a stark space of steel and glass, with a long black table that gleamed like a frozen lake. Evelyn and I sat at the far end, two old relics in a world of sharp suits and sharper ambitions. Then Michael arrived, striding in like he already owned the place. Beside him was Richard Holt, the pharma executive, his smile as cold as the table. Two lawyers flanked them, their faces blank but confident. Michael nodded at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes for the sad old man he thought he'd outsmarted. Henry, he said, let's make this quick. Carter, the lawyer, started the meeting, his voice droning through legal terms, shares, assets, intellectual property. My heart beat steady, a metronome counting down to the moment. Michael's eyes gleamed, his fingers tapping impatiently. He was so close to his prize. Carter reached the final item. And now, he said, we'll execute the transfer of all corporate assets, including the proprietary sensor technology, to Michael Bennett, designated heir and new CEO. I cleared my throat. The sound was small but sharp, cutting through the sterile air. Every head turned. Before we sign anything, I said, my voice calm, deliberate, there's one last thing. A message from Claire. I think the board deserves to see it. Michael's smile faltered. Henry, please, he said, his tone sharp with irritation. This isn't the time for sentiment. But I held his gaze. As her father, I believe it's my right. Carter hesitated, then nodded. No procedural harm, he muttered. Evelyn stood, her movement slow but sure, and connected Claire's encrypted device to the boardroom's console. The giant screen flickered. Then there she was, Claire, my daughter, alive. Not a recording, but live, her face sharp and resolute, looking straight at us. Hello, Michael. Hello, Richard, she said, her voice echoing through the room like a hammer striking steel. Michael's face went white. A strangled sound escaped his throat. Surprised to see me? Claire continued. When you tried to access my company's assets, you triggered Project Beacon. My trap. It's over. Every screen in the room flashed red. Access denied. A second line scrolled across. System lockdown initiated. Evidence transmitted to FBI. Michael lunged for the console, shouting, "Shut it off!" But it was too late. The glass doors slid open, and 3 FBI agents stepped in, their badges glinting. Michael Bennett, Richard Holt, the lead agent said, her voice cold and final. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and corporate espionage. I sat there, watching Michael's empire collapse, his lies ticking down to zero. Claire had outsmarted them all, and I'd helped her set the clock. The boardroom was silent after the FBI led Michael and Richard away, their handcuffs clicking like the final tick of a broken clock. I sat there, the weight of the moment settling over me, heavy but clean. Claire's face had vanished from the screen, but I could still feel her, alive, fighting, my daughter. The machine of lies had stopped, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. A month later, Claire came home. We didn't talk about the case, the betrayal, or the fear. Words felt too small for that. Instead, we went to my workshop, a cramped shed behind my house, filled with the smell of oil and old brass. There, on the workbench, was the antique clock we'd started restoring when she was a girl, a fussy old thing with a chipped face and stubborn gears. We picked up where we'd left off, our hands moving in quiet rhythm. Her fingers, quick and sure, tightened a tiny screw. Mine, slower now, polished the brass. Each turn of the tool was a conversation, a way to rebuild what we'd almost lost. As we worked, I thought about what this all meant. There's a difference between what you leave to someone and what you leave in them. Money, companies, assets, those can be stolen, squandered, lost in a heartbeat. But the things you build inside someone, trust, courage, the ability to see the truth through the noise, those are a legacy. Claire had taken the lessons I'd taught her, the patience of a watchmaker, and turned them into a trap that saved her life. Together, we'd wound the clock back, set it ticking true. If you've listened to my story and believe a parent's instinct is never wrong, please like this video and subscribe for more. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a time you trusted your gut. For me, standing in that workshop with Claire, I realized the real treasure isn't what you own. It's what you pass on, the gears you set in motion, the love that keeps ticking long after you're gone.